At the will reading, the attorney announced, "You're getting a shabby old house and $10." The room burst into laughter. My father smirked. "You threw your life away on a penniless geezer. Now all you have is trash." I just grinned and left. Then the serial code on that bill uncovered a truth that made my father collapse in terror. Can you imagine being constantly told you're a failure, an outsider, while the very people judging you are secretly building their empire on a mountain of lies? My grandpa, the kindest man I ever knew, left me a puzzle, a hidden truth so explosive it would unravel everything I thought I knew about my own family, forcing me to make a choice that would tear us all apart. My name is Eli, and for most of my 29 years, I've felt like the black sheep of the Callahan family. I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a quiet city cradled by the Susquehanna River. It's got its own charm, cobblestone streets, old brick buildings, ancient oak trees, and I love it here. My job? I'm an archivist at the local university library. I spend my days meticulously organizing dusty books, ancient documents, and handwritten notes from centuries past. It's not glamorous, and the pay definitely won't make me rich, but I adore it. There's something magical about those old pages, how history, especially the Cold War era, unfolds before me like a gripping novel. But in my family's eyes, I'm practically a ghost, a failure. "Eli, you're still living off that pathetic salary?" My cousin Jake would sneer at family gatherings, his eyes full of contempt. To them, I was the useless one, the only Callahan who didn't chase money and fame in the cutthroat world of business. My dad, Thomas Callahan, is a real estate mogul, building an empire across Harrisburg. My uncle Dan, his younger brother, is his right-hand man, always in expensive suits, always with that polished, fake smile. They operate in a world of million-dollar deals, flashy cars, and lavish parties. And me? I'm just Eli, the guy in a worn-out sweater, driving an old car, who'd rather get lost in a book than talk about stocks. Our family gatherings were always held in opulent rooms, sparkling chandeliers, crystal wine glasses clinking. My cousins, Jake, Emily, Sarah, would constantly brag about their European vacations, designer watches, or new apartments in the city. I was usually the quiet one in the corner, pouring water, clearing plates, completely invisible. No one ever asked me a single question. "Eli, what do you even do in that library all day? Organize books?" Ha! The job of the century. Emily once scoffed, and the whole table erupted in laughter. I just smiled, nodded, and kept clearing the table. I'd learned to live on the sidelines. But there was one place where I never felt like an outsider. My grandparents' old wooden house, tucked away near the Allegheny forest. My grandpa Walter Edmund Callahan, was a tall man, though time had bent his back and turned his hair snow-white. He always had an old book in his gnarled hands and a cup of black coffee. Their house smelled of damp wood and a lifetime of memories. Grandma Maggie was the kindest soul, with a warm smile and eyes full of endless patience. They were like an old painting, quiet but radiating a profound life. My family largely ignored them. To them, Grandpa was just a poor old man stuck in the past, with nothing of value except a crumbling house and a few acres of land no one cared about. My dad once said bluntly at a party, "The old man's got nothing to leave behind. Don't expect anything." His whole life was just reading books and telling more stories. Uncle Dan even smirked, adding, "Such a waste of land. That place could fetch a few million if sold." My heart tightened. Grandpa never responded. He just sat quietly, staring out the window, as if living in a world none of us could possibly understand. But to me, Grandpa was an entire world. Every weekend, I drive my old car, bringing pastries or medicine, and just visit. I loved sitting by the fireplace, listening to his stories, tales of war, soldiers, and secrets buried under the dust of time. His voice was low, deliberate, and every word seemed to carve itself into my mind. He loved history, especially the Cold War, just like me. I'd bring him books about the CIA, KGB, or espionage that I found at the library. "Eli, do you know," he once said, his eyes lighting up, "this world is full of secrets. Some people live their entire lives, and no one ever knows what they did to change history. Grandma would smile, pretending to scold him. Don't confuse the boy with your stories. But I knew she loved them, and so did I. Those afternoons in that old wooden house, with the crackling fire and the faint smell of baked goods, made me feel like I belonged. I didn't need an expensive car or my family's approval. I just needed Grandpa to be healthy, Grandma to keep smiling, and their warm stories on those cold winter days. Not everyone in my family treated me with cold indifference, though. My mother, Susan, was the only one who never mocked me. She was a quiet woman with sad eyes and light brown hair, always tied in a bun. In the Callahan family, she was a shadow, always overshadowed by my father and Uncle Dan. She never argued with Dad or spoke up when the family ridiculed me, but I knew she loved me. Sometimes, when it was just the two of us, she'd hold my hand and say, "Eli, you don't have to be like them. You just have to be yourself." In those moments, I felt like she was trying to protect me from a world she herself couldn't escape. Life went on like that until one late autumn evening, when everything began to change. It was freezing, and I visited my grandparents as usual. Grandpa was sitting by the fireplace, holding an old book, but his eyes, they were different. He looked at me, not with his usual gentle smile, but with a deep, searching gaze, as if trying to read my very soul. Grandma had gone to bed early, leaving just the two of us by the crackling fire. "Eli," he said suddenly, his voice low and serious. "If there's a secret that could change the way you see this entire family, would you want to know?" I looked up, surprised. Grandpa often told stories, but he'd never been this serious. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Grandpa, are you telling spy stories again? I know you love that stuff." But he didn't smile. His eyes, under the flickering firelight, gleamed strangely, as if he were looking through me to a place I couldn't see. "I'm not joking, Eli," he said, his voice soft but firm. "There are things I've kept hidden my whole life. But maybe the time for you to know everything is coming." A chill ran down my spine, not from the autumn cold, but from his words. I wanted to ask more, but he just shook his head and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're the only one I trust, Eli. Remember that." That night, as I drove home, his words replayed in my mind. A secret? Something that could change how I see the family? I told myself he was just getting old, maybe talking nonsense. But deep down, I knew Grandpa never sighed anything without a reason. And that look in his eyes, it wasn't the look of a confused old man. It was the look of someone preparing to entrust something monumental. Autumn quickly passed, golden leaves blanketing the roads. But with the season, Grandpa's health began to decline. One day, I found him by the fireplace, breathing heavily, his face paler than usual. Grandma, her silver hair neatly tied back, her hands trembling, brewed him tea. "He's been coughing all week," she whispered, her voice laced with worry. "The doctor says it's pneumonia, but he refuses to go to the hospital. He insists on staying here." I looked at Grandpa, the man who was once tall and strong, now worn down by time. His threadbare sweater seemed looser, and his eyes, though still bright, carried a hint of exhaustion. I knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. "Grandpa, you have to see a doctor." "I'll take you," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head, giving me a faint smile. "Eli, I'm old. I don't need a hospital. I just need to be here, with your grandmother, and with you." He squeezed my hand lightly. I felt the warmth of his gnarled hand, though it had grown much weaker. I wanted to argue, to convince him, but his eyes silenced me. They weren't the eyes of someone giving up, but of someone quietly accepting the inevitable. From that day on, I visited them constantly, sometimes taking entire days off work to stay overnight. I brought medicine, cooked soup, and helped Grandma clean. On those nights, I'd sit by Grandpa, listening to his stories. But they were no longer about wars or spies. He began talking about his life, his youth, and distant journeys he'd never described in detail. "Eli, have you ever thought that a person could live two lives?" he asked one evening, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his face. "Two lives?" I repeated, unsure what he meant. He nodded, staring into the flames. One life that everyone sees, and another that only the person themselves knows. Some things have to be buried deep, because if they're revealed, they could destroy everything. His words sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask more, but Grandma walked in with a tray of cookies, and he shifted to talking about her baking. I smiled, but inside, his words were like a stone dropped into a still lake, creating ripples that wouldn't stop. While I cared for Grandpa, the rest of my family seemed indifferent. Dad was busy with new real estate deals, flying to New York or Chicago. Uncle Dan was constantly in the papers, boasting about their company's latest purchase. My cousins were, as usual, caught up in their lavish parties and exotic trips. That Thanksgiving, not one of them visited. My father called, offering a few cursory words. "Is your grandpa okay? I'm swamped, but maybe I'll stop by next week." He never did. Uncle Dan sent an expensive gift basket, but not a single word of concern. My cousins didn't even bother to call. Only my mother and I visited my grandparents for the holiday. Mom brought a roasted turkey, and I brought ginger cookies. We sat around the old wooden table, eating and talking. Grandpa coughed more than usual, but he still managed to smile and tell stories about Thanksgivings when Dad and Uncle Dan were kids. Back then, those two boys would fight over the biggest slice of pumpkin pie, he said, his eyes distant. I looked at Mom, who gave a sad smile. I knew she felt their loneliness, too, but she said nothing. My mother was always like that, as if she'd learned to accept her place in the Callahan family. In the months that followed, Grandpa's health grew worse. The pneumonia didn't improve, and the doctor warned he might not make it through the winter. I started staying at their house more often, sometimes sleeping on the old armchair. Grandma, though frail herself, cared for him with a love I'd never seen in anyone else. She stayed up at night, placing warm cloths on his forehead, brewing ginger tea. But I saw the fear in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. She knew he was slipping away. One night, as Grandpa's coughing kept him awake, I sat by his bedside, holding his hand. Their bedroom was small, with an old wooden bed and a window overlooking the Allegheny forest. Moonlight streamed through, casting a silvery glow over his face. He looked at me, his eyes clouded by illness, but still sharp. "Eli," he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." "What place, Grandpa?" I asked, my heart pounding. This was the second time he'd said something so cryptic, and I couldn't pretend it was just the ramblings of a sick old man. He squeezed my hand, stronger than I thought he could. "You'll know," he said. "Just remember, you're the only one I trust. Don't let them blind you." I wanted to press him further, but he broke into a long coughing fit, and Grandma hurried in with warm water. She looked at me, her eyes saying, "Don't push him." I nodded, but inside, his words were a small flame, smoldering, impossible to extinguish. In the days that followed, I started noticing small details I hadn't before. Once, helping Grandma clean, I spotted an old wooden box in the corner of the living room, locked with a small padlock. "What's this, Grandma?" I asked. She only smiled and shook her head. "It's your grandfather's," she said. "Best to leave it alone." I didn't press, but I couldn't forget the image of that box, its surface scratched as if it had traveled through decades of history. Grandpa's final days passed quietly. He didn't talk much anymore, but every time I visited, he would hold my hand, as if trying to pass on some invisible strength. Grandma stayed by his side, never leaving him, though I could see she was growing more haggard. My family, as usual, remained absent. Dad called once, asked a few perfunctory questions, then quickly ended the call because of an important meeting. And then, the fateful night came. As I sat by his side, Grandpa opened his eyes and looked at me one last time. "Eli," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear. "I'm proud of you." Those were his final words to me. The next morning, he passed away as quietly as he had lived. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, feeling the last of his warmth fade. Grandma stood beside me, not crying, only gently stroking his hair. I knew she was in immense pain, but she was stronger than I'd ever imagined. "Your grandfather lived a long life, Eli," she said, her voice trembling, "and he loved you more than anyone." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. But amidst the grief, Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. "Don't trust what you see on the surface. When I'm gone, go to that place." I knew my journey was only just beginning. Grandpa's funeral took place on a cold, drizzly day. The sky was gray, tiny raindrops streaking down the windows of the funeral home, as if the world itself was weeping. The room was simply decorated, an oak coffin amid white floral wreaths. I stood in a corner, wearing an old black suit Mom had found for me. It was tight, but I didn't care. My mind was lost in memories of Grandpa, his warm voice, his sharp eyes, and those cryptic words I still couldn't decipher. As expected, my family showed up in full force. My father, Thomas Callahan, stood in the front row, his sleek black suit impeccable, his face stern but unable to hide a hint of impatience. Uncle Dan, with his neatly combed hair and expensive silk tie, stood beside him, whispering to a stranger. My cousins, Jake, Emily, and Sarah, clustered in a corner, chatting and glancing at their phones. None of them seemed genuinely grieving. To them, the funeral felt like a formality, a checkpoint before returning to their busy lives. My mother stood close to me, quietly holding my hand. She wore a simple black dress, her eyes red but tearless. I knew she was holding back, not wanting my father or anyone else in the Callahan family to see her vulnerability. Grandma sat in the front row, her frail hands clutching a handkerchief, gazing at a black and white photo of Grandpa from his youth, a rare smile, vibrant eyes. I wondered what she was thinking. Did she know about that place? Did she, too, carry the secrets he had kept? The funeral was brief. A priest delivered a few prayers, describing Grandpa as a simple man who loved his family and lived a full life. I wanted to stand up, to shout that he was more than just a simple man, that he was extraordinary, the one who taught me about history, honesty, and how to live rightly. But I stayed silent. I knew in this room, no one truly cared about Grandpa the way I did. After the service, the family moved to an upscale restaurant for the reception. I didn't want to go, but Mom insisted. "Eli, you have to be there for Grandpa," she said. I nodded, though all I wanted was to return to the wooden house, sit by the fireplace, and remember the afternoons when he told me stories. The restaurant, chosen by my father, had glass walls overlooking the Susquehanna River. People laughed, clinked wine glasses, and talked about work, real estate, or upcoming vacations. No one mentioned Grandpa, except for a few perfunctory remarks. He passed peacefully, didn't he? Or he was old. It was his time. I sat at the end of the table, quietly eating cold soup, listening to conversations I didn't belong to. Jake bragged about his new Tesla. Emily showed off a designer handbag from Paris. My father and Uncle Dan discussed a new real estate project, their voices brimming with ambition. "That land is gold," Dad said, his eyes gleaming. "Just need to sort out a few issues with the city council, and we'll be rolling in it." Uncle Dan nodded, smirking. I looked at them, wondering if they truly knew how Grandpa had lived, what he thought, or what he'd left behind. Grandma didn't come to the restaurant. She said she wanted to stay at the funeral home for a while before returning home. "She needs time alone, Eli," Mom had said. I understood, but I couldn't shake the vast emptiness in my heart. Grandpa was gone, and I felt like I was losing a part of myself. A few days later, Grandpa's lawyer, Harold Steinberg, contacted the family to announce the reading of the will. Steinberg was a middle-aged man, tall and thin, with salt and pepper hair and silver-rimmed glasses. He had a stern demeanor, his voice low and deliberate, as if every word was carefully chosen. The reading took place in a small but elegant law office. The entire family gathered, this time not with the somber air of a funeral, but with an almost greedy anticipation. My father sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, his gaze sharp. Uncle Dan sat beside him, constantly checking his watch as if he had more important things to do. Jake, Emily, and Sarah whispered to each other, giggling as if waiting to open Christmas presents. My mother sat next to me, silent as always, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Grandma wasn't there. She said she didn't want to hear the will, that she trusted Grandpa had done what was right. I sat in the corner, feeling more out of place than ever. I didn't expect anything from the will. I knew Grandpa wasn't wealthy, at least not in the way my family defined wealth. The wooden house, a few acres of land, and his old books, that's all I thought he had. But deep down, I hoped he'd left me something. Not money, but a sign, an answer to the cryptic words he'd spoken. Steinberg began reading, his voice steady and clear. Grandpa divided his assets into small portions for his children and grandchildren. A bit of savings for Dad, Uncle Dan, and other relatives. A few keepsakes for my cousins. No one seemed satisfied. That's it, Jake muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Emily crossed her arms, pouting. My father frowned, and Uncle Dan shook his head, as if they'd expected some hidden treasure. Then Steinberg looked at me, adjusted his glasses, and continued. To my grandson, Elliot James Callahan, I leave the old property number 1417 and $10. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter. Jake was the first to burst out, pointing at me. Old property number 1417? What's that? A pile of moldy books. Emily giggled, covering her mouth. $10? The old man sure knew how to joke, Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. My father didn't laugh, but his eyes held a look of contempt, as if I was the joke. Uncle Dan smirked, muttering something to Dad that I couldn't hear. I sat there, feeling the ground beneath me give way. I didn't care about money, but I couldn't understand why Grandpa would leave me something so seemingly meaningless. Old property number 1417. $10. I looked at Steinberg, hoping for an explanation, but he only nodded, his expression stern, revealing nothing more. That's it? My father asked, his voice cold. Nothing else? Steinberg shook his head. That's the entirety of the will. If there are no questions, I'll conclude the meeting. The family stood, the sound of chairs scraping against the wooden floor grating in my ears. Jake clapped me on the shoulder, laughing loudly. Congrats, Eli. Now you're the proud owner of $10 and a pile of junk. Emily and Sarah laughed along, while my father gave me a single glance before leaving with Uncle Dan. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. I left the law office feeling utterly hollow. The rain still fell outside, soaking my coat as I stepped onto the street. I wasn't angry at Grandpa. I could never be angry with him. But I was confused, deeply disappointed, and above all, I felt like I'd missed something crucial. His words, "Don't trust what you see on the surface," echoed in my mind like a puzzle without an answer. That evening, I drove to my grandparents' wooden house. Grandma was sitting by the fireplace, knitting, the firelight casting patches of light and shadow on her face. She looked at me, offering a faint smile. Eli, why are you here so late? I sat down beside her and recounted the will reading, my voice heavy. I don't care about money, Grandma, but why would he leave me something so meaningless? Old property number 1417. $10. I don't understand. She stopped knitting, placing her frail hands on mine. Eli, she said, her voice soft, but firm. Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. If he chose you, there's a purpose. She stood, went to the bedroom, and returned with a small, tarnished brass key. She placed it in my hand. Your grandfather once said, "The answers are there. Go to the old house, Eli. You'll find what he wanted you to know." I looked at the key, the cold metal sending a chill through my palm. My heart beat faster. The old house? I asked. You mean property number 1417? She nodded, her eyes holding a secret she couldn't voice. You'll know when you get there, she said, echoing Grandpa's words. Trust him, Eli, and trust yourself. I left the wooden house that night, the key heavy in my pocket. The rain had stopped, but the cold wind still rustled through the oak trees, whispering something I couldn't yet understand. I knew I couldn't stop. Grandpa had left me a puzzle, and I had to find the solution. The days following the will reading left me feeling like a ghost. My job at the library, where I once found peace, now only made me restless. I sorted documents, entered data, but my mind kept drifting back to the brass key and that strange $10 bill. I'd turned it over dozens of times, staring at Benjamin Franklin's face, examining every detail. It was just an old, slightly crumpled piece of currency. Or was it? Grandma's words echoed. Your grandfather never did anything without a reason. The answers are there. But where was there? And what was old property number 1417? That weekend, I decided to dig deeper. I called Grandma, asking if she knew anything else about 1417. She was silent for a moment before speaking softly. Eli, your grandfather once mentioned a place, an old house in the suburbs near the old road leading to the river. He said it was where he kept important things. Try looking there. Maybe 1417 is connected to that. I hung up and started searching online for addresses in Harrisburg related to the number 1417. After a few hours, I found an old listing. 1417 Old River Road. A remote road in the suburbs near the Susquehanna River. There was no information about the house, only that it had been abandoned for years. A jolt of electricity ran through me. Could this be the place Grandpa had mentioned? I stuffed the $10 bill and the key into my pocket, grabbed my backpack, and drove out of the city. Old River Road was winding, covered in dry leaves and overgrown weeds. The houses grew sparse as I left central Harrisburg, and the landscape turned desolate, with only bare trees and the faint glimmer of the river in the distance. When I reached 1417, I could hardly believe my eyes. Before me stood a dilapidated wooden house, looking as though it had been abandoned for decades. The roof sagged, windows were shattered, and the wooden walls were peeling like old skin. Weeds grew knee-high, and a rusted, "No trespassing" sign hung loosely by the gate. I parked the car, a chill running down my spine. I stepped over the gate, carefully avoiding rotted boards on the path. A cold wind blew through, carrying the damp smell of earth and an eerie silence. I tried the brass key in the front door, but it didn't fit. The door was so decayed that a gentle push opened it, creaking like something out of a horror movie. Inside, the house was dark and cold. The wooden floor was coated in a thick layer of dust, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold. Scattered remnants of old furniture, a table with a broken leg, cobweb-draped chairs, a shattered lamp, littered the room. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating every corner. The house was small, a living room, a tiny kitchen, and a hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. I checked each room, tapped on walls, lifted tattered rugs, hoping for a clue. Nothing. Just dust and silence. I began to wonder if I was chasing an illusion. Had Grandpa really left me a puzzle with no solution? I sat on an old chair, trying to suppress my growing disappointment. Then I pulled out the $10 bill again, examining the serial number, J1417K890632. The number 1417 had led me here, but what about the rest? After nearly an hour, just as I was about to give up, my heel caught on a floorboard near the fireplace, producing a strange, hollow sound. I knelt down and pried at it gently. The board was loose. When I pulled harder, it came free, revealing a small metal hatch with a combination lock. My heart pounded. A hidden cellar, in an abandoned house, that no one knew Grandpa owned. I looked at the $10 bill, focusing on the serial number. If 1417 was the code, I'd try it. I entered 1-4-1-7 into the lock. A soft click sounded, and the hatch popped open. I could barely breathe. Grandpa had planned everything, step by step, leading me here. What had he hidden? And why had he chosen me to find it? I stood there, staring down the narrow wooden staircase, leading into darkness. My phone's flashlight illuminated only the first few steps. Below was a pitch-black void, as if it were swallowing everything. The air rising from the cellar was cold and damp, carrying the scent of old earth and rusted metal. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Grandpa, what do you want me to do here?" I whispered, as if he were still somewhere, guiding me. There was no answer, only the whistle of wind through the hatch, like a warning. I descended carefully, each rotted wooden step creaking under my weight. Every step felt like it was pulling me deeper into a secret I wasn't ready to face. When I reached the bottom, I swept my flashlight around. The cellar was small, no larger than a storage room, with stained concrete walls and an old wooden table in the center. On the table sat a small safe with a combination lock, a metal box without a lock, and a stack of dusty documents. An old oil lamp hung on the wall, but I didn't dare light it, fearing the stale air would make things worse. I approached the table, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I tried entering 1-4-1-7 into the safe, hoping the code from the $10 bill would work again. The lock didn't budge. I glanced at the bill again. The serial number, J1417K890632, clear under the light. I tried the remaining digits, 8-9-6-3. A sharp click sounded, and the safe opened. I could barely breathe. Grandpa had planned everything, step by step, leading me here. Inside the safe was a thick bundle of documents tied with a leather cord, a black leather-bound notebook, and a small silver USB drive. I picked up the notebook first, flipping through its pages. Grandpa's handwriting, firm and neat, recorded names, dates, locations, and strange symbols I couldn't decipher. There were communication diagrams, maps of Eastern Europe with marked points, and notes about operations with names like Blue Horizon and Shadow Relay. One page read clearly, Berlin, December 3rd, 1978. Met K at rendezvous. Defection successful. I turned the page and found a black and white photo taped inside, showing a younger grandpa in a suit standing beside a stranger in a military uniform. A handwritten caption below read, Operation Blue Horizon. CIA. CIA. The words sent a chill through me. I shook my head, trying to process it. Grandpa Walt, the man in a threadbare sweater sitting by the fireplace telling history stories, was a spy? A character from the espionage tales he used to share with me? I couldn't believe it, but these pages, written in his own hand, couldn't be fake. I moved to the bundle of documents. Inside were contracts stamped with government seals, some declassified, titled, Strategic Coordinator for European Operations, 1974 to 1988. Grandpa's name, Walter Edmund Callahan, was printed clearly, along with details of operations in East Germany, Poland, and Hungary. One document stated, W. Callahan, code name Falcon, responsible for coordinating a network of operatives in Eastern Europe. My head spun. Grandpa wasn't just a history enthusiast. He was part of history. A man behind covert operations, defections, and schemes that shaped the world. But what stunned me most was the small metal box beside the safe. I opened it to find another, thinner file and a small hard drive labeled WEC Personal. The file was titled, Thomas Callahan and Daniel Callahan. My heart stopped. My father and Uncle Dan. I flipped through it quickly, finding copies of invoices, contracts, and Grandpa's handwritten notes. One page read, TC and DC suspected money laundering through Bright Future Charity, 2018 to 2023. Another listed real estate transactions with mismatched figures, accompanied by a note, links to state officials, fraudulent contracts. There were even copies of emails between Dad and Uncle Dan discussing a plan to transfer funds through offshore accounts. I sank to the cellar floor, my hands trembling. Grandpa had been watching Dad and Uncle Dan. He knew they were doing something wrong. I kept flipping and found a carefully folded handwritten letter in Grandpa's script. I opened it and read each line. Asterisk Eli, if you're reading this letter, it means you found the cellar. I'm sorry for placing this burden on your shoulders, but you're the only one I trust. I've lived 2 lives, one as the man the family knew, and one the world could never know. But the most painful thing isn't the secrets I kept from the war, but what I discovered about my 2 sons. Asterisk, I've been watching Thomas and Daniel for years. Ever since I suspected their company was involved in shady activities. I found evidence of money laundering, collusion with officials, and a fake charity to hide illegal profits. I wrote a report, intending to send it to the authorities. But I couldn't. They're my sons, Eli. I didn't want them in prison. Didn't want the family torn apart. But I also couldn't let their crimes continue. I leave this decision to you. On the hard drive, you'll find a video I recorded explaining everything. If you think they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. Be strong, as I've always believed you could be. I'm proud of you. Grandpa Walt. Asterisk tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Grandpa had carried this burden alone his entire life. He knew my father and uncle had gone astray, but he couldn't bring himself to destroy them. Instead, he passed it to me. A burden, yes, but also an immense trust. I wiped my tears and picked up the hard drive. I needed to watch that video, to hear Grandpa's voice explain it all. As I climbed the stairs, I felt like I was no longer the Eli from a few hours ago. This cellar had changed everything. Grandpa wasn't just a simple man. He was a spy, a silent hero, and he knew about my father's and uncle's crimes. But he was also a father, unable to destroy his own sons. And now he'd entrusted that responsibility to me. I left the abandoned house at 1417, Old River Road in the dark, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. The letter, notebook, and hard drive were tucked inside, but they felt like stones pressing against my chest. Even so, I needed to verify what I had found. I needed someone who understood history, the Cold War, to help me comprehend who Grandpa truly was. The next morning, I drove to the university library where I worked. I knew one person who could help, Dr. Leonard Brooks, a history professor specializing in the Cold War. He was a man in his 60s, with disheveled silver hair and round glasses that always slid down his nose. I'd met him a few times when he came to the library for research. We talked for hours about espionage, the KGB, the CIA, and the secrets of the 20th century. If anyone could make sense of these documents, it was Dr. Brooks. I brought the leather-bound notebook and a few photos from the cellar, carefully wrapped in a cloth. I didn't bring all the documents, fearing that if someone discovered them, I might be in serious trouble. When I stepped into Dr. Brooks' office, I found him seated among stacks of books and papers, a quill pen in hand like a scholar from a bygone era. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. Eli, what a surprise. How can I help you? I hesitated, then placed the notebook and photos on his desk. Dr. Brooks, these are something I found. I think they're related to the Cold War, but I'm not sure. Can you help me figure them out? He raised an eyebrow, picked up the notebook, and flipped through a few pages. His eyes widened, and he adjusted his glasses, reading more closely. Where did you get this, Eli? His voice suddenly turned serious. I told a condensed version of the truth, that I found it among my grandfather's belongings, that he loved history, and might have been involved in something significant. I didn't mention the CIA or my father and uncle, only sharing enough to avoid suspicion. Dr. Brooks continued flipping through the notebook, pausing at a page with coded symbols and communication diagrams. This is standard CIA cipher, he murmured, almost to himself. He picked up a photo, the one of Grandpa in Berlin in 1978, and froze. Do you realize what you're holding, Eli? These ciphers, the way the notes are structured, the diagrams. This isn't ordinary documentation. This is government-level material, the kind only someone with high clearance would have access to. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. What do you mean? He looked at me, his gaze sharp. If these belong to your grandfather, Walter Callahan, then he wasn't just a history enthusiast. He could have been a major figure, a very major figure in intelligence operations. There's a note here, he pointed to the photo, about a covert operative who disappeared in 1978. If your grandfather was involved in this, he could have been a coordinator or even a regional commander. My head spun. What Dr. Brooks said aligned with the documents in the cellar, strategic coordinator for European operations, but hearing it from an expert made it feel more real, more terrifying. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Brooks nodded, flipping through more pages. These ciphers are internal CIA communication codes used in covert operations. And this photo, he pointed to a group shot in a meeting room, mentions Operation Blue Horizon. I've read about that operation. If your grandfather was Falcon, as the documents suggest, he didn't just participate. He could have been running an entire CIA network. I sank into a chair, feeling as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Grandpa, the man in a worn sweater telling stories by the fireplace, was a CIA commander. I remembered the afternoons when he spoke about the Cold War, his eyes lighting up as he described nameless spies. It turned out he wasn't just telling stories. He was reliving his own memories. Can you check further? I asked. I mean, to confirm this is real? Dr. Brooks nodded. I have a contact at the National Archives. They have declassified records on Cold War operations. I can send them some details from this notebook, without mentioning you or your grandfather, to verify. But Eli, you need to understand that if this is real, you're holding something that could cause serious trouble. Even declassified documents like these can attract unwanted attention. I nodded, unease rising within me. I understand, but I need to know the truth. Grandpa trusted me, and I have to find out why. Dr. Brooks agreed, promising to contact his friend and get back to me in a few days. He handed me the notebook and photos, urging me to keep them safe. Don't let anyone know you have these, Eli, he said, his tone grave. Not everyone will be happy you possess them. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Brooks had said. Grandpa was Falcon, a CIA commander, a silent hero. But he was also a father, heartbroken over his son's crimes. His letter echoed in my mind. Asterisk, if they still have a chance to turn back, give them that chance. But if they choose to continue their crimes, I leave the decision to you. Asterisk, the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. My father and Uncle Dan, the ones who always saw me as useless, were living off dirty money, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I got home, locked the door carefully, and hid the backpack in a concealed corner of my closet. I didn't dare let anyone see these documents. Not my mother, not Grandma, and certainly not Dad or Uncle Dan. But I knew I couldn't stop. Grandpa had chosen me, and I had to do the right thing, even if it meant confronting my own family. The days after meeting Dr. Brooks were filled with constant tension. Every noise outside my door, every ping of a text message on my phone made me jump, as if someone were watching me. The documents from the cellar, the notebook, the letter, the hard drive, felt like ticking time bombs, waiting for me to decide what to do with them. Dr. Brooks had promised to verify the information about Grandpa's past, but he had also warned me. These things could cause big trouble. I knew he was right, but I couldn't just sit still and pretend nothing had happened. Grandpa's letter kept echoing in my mind. My father, Thomas Callahan, was a stern, patriarchal man who always saw me as a failure. Uncle Dan, with his slick smile and cunning mind, was even more intimidating. I knew they wouldn't listen easily, but I had to try for Grandpa and for myself. I decided to meet them at my father's office in downtown Harrisburg. Callahan and Sons Real Estate was housed in a sleek glass building with polished signs. I rarely came here. The last time was years ago, when Dad tried to convince me to quit my library job and work for him. I arrived at the office on a rainy afternoon, carrying copies of a few documents from the cellar, just enough to prove I knew the truth, but not everything. I didn't want them to know about the hard drive or Grandpa's video. Not yet. When I entered the meeting room, I saw Dad seated at the head of the table, reviewing a stack of papers. Uncle Dan stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice smooth as he persuaded someone. Both looked up as I walked in, and I immediately felt the cold weight of Dad's stare. Eli, what are you doing here? Dad asked, his tone barely concealing irritation. Don't you know to call first? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I need to talk to you and Uncle Dan. About the company. And about Grandpa. Uncle Dan hung up his phone, smirking. Grandpa? Why are you bringing up the old man now? He left you $10, didn't he? He laughed loudly, as if it were a hilarious joke. I didn't return his smile. I placed the documents on the table, opening to the first page, a copy of an invoice from the Bright Future charity with mismatched figures, accompanied by Grandpa's handwritten note. Suspected money laundering, 2020. I found some things among Grandpa's belongings, I said, my voice steady but firm. These show that your company is doing something wrong. Money laundering, fraudulent contracts with state officials, a fake charity. The room fell silent. Dad stared at the document, his face darkening. Uncle Dan stepped forward, grabbed the paper, skimmed it, and tossed it back onto the table. "What the hell are you talking about, Eli?" He growled, his voice thick with anger. "You think you can waltz in here with some nonsense papers and accuse us?" "I'm not accusing," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I just want you and Dad to stop. To make things right before it goes too far. Grandpa knew everything. He'd been watching you for years. He didn't go public because he didn't want you both in prison, but he left these to me. And he told me to do the right thing." Dad stood, his hands slamming onto the table, his eyes burning into me. "You dare talk about the right thing?" he shouted. "You, a library clerk, living off a pitiful salary, dare stand here and lecture me on how to run my business? Your grandfather was a stubborn old fool, and so are you. These are fake, Eli. Fake. You think you can tear down this family with a few pieces of paper?" "They're not fake," I replied, my voice rising more than I intended. "I have proof, Dad. Invoices, emails, transactions, and more. I just want you and Uncle Dan to stop, to dissolve the fake charity, to return what doesn't belong to you. I don't want to take this public." Uncle Dan sneered, stepping closer. "You're threatening us, Eli? Who do you think you are? Some kid with a few papers and a hero complex? I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your reputation, everything." I felt the blood rush to my head, but I stood my ground. "I'm not trying to be a hero," I said. "I'm just doing what Grandpa believed I could. He gave me a chance to talk to you first. But if you and Dad don't listen, I won't stop." Dad stepped toward me, pointing a finger in my face. "You dare?" he roared. "Do you know what this would do? It would destroy this family. Destroy the company Dan and I built from nothing. Stop this nonsense." I looked straight into his eyes, feeling for the first time in my life that I wasn't small before him. "If you and Uncle Dan won't change, I'll have no choice but to expose the truth to the public," I said. Uncle Dan laughed loudly, but the sound didn't hide the tension in his eyes. "You're crazy, Eli. Completely crazy. You think you can take us on? We have money, connections, power. You're just a nobody." I didn't respond. I gathered the documents, stuffed them back into my backpack, and left the office. As I stepped outside, the rain soaked my coat. I heard Dad shouting something from inside, but I didn't turn back. I had given them a chance just as Grandpa wanted. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't stop. And I also knew that my next step would change everything. I drove home through the rain, my mind flooded with the scornful words and shouts of my father and Uncle Dan. I had hoped they would listen, admit their mistakes, and stop. But I was wrong. Not only did they refuse, but they threatened me, treating me like a threat to be eliminated. But they didn't know that I had seen too much, understood too much, and I carried Grandpa's promise. Do the right thing. When I got back to my apartment, I sat at the table, staring at the backpack containing the documents, the hard drive, and Grandpa's letter. I pulled out the photo of him in Berlin in 1978, gazing at his sharp eyes. He had lived a life full of secrets and responsibilities, but he never turned his back on the truth. I knew I couldn't do otherwise. Yet, deciding to expose the truth wasn't easy. I wasn't just facing my father and Uncle Dan, but the entire Callahan family, the ones who always saw me as an outsider. They would turn against me, despise me. But I had no other choice. I opened my laptop, plugged in the hard drive, and watched Grandpa's video again. His warm, steady voice felt like it was speaking directly to me. Asterisk, if they choose the wrong path, do the right thing, Eli. I trust you. Asterisk, I wiped away tears, picked up my phone, and called Harold Steinberg, the lawyer who had read Grandpa's will. Eli? Steinberg's voice came through the phone, calm as always. What's going on? I need to meet you, I said. I found some things from Grandpa. Important things. I need your help to get them to the right people. Steinberg was silent for a moment, then replied, All right, meet me at my office tomorrow morning. The next morning, I went to Steinberg's office, bringing all the documents, the hard drive and the notebook. I told him everything: the cellar, Grandpa's CIA past, and the evidence against my father and Uncle Dan. He listened, nodded, and reviewed the documents with absolute focus. "Are you sure you want to do this, Eli?" he asked, his gaze stern. "If you hand these over to the press and the Department of Justice, there's no turning back. Your family won't forgive you." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. "I know, but Grandpa trusted me. I have to do the right thing." Steinberg agreed, promising to contact a trusted investigative reporter and forward the documents to the Department of Justice. "You've done the right thing, Eli," he said. "But brace yourself. A storm is coming." A week later, everything exploded. The first article appeared in the Harrisburg Times, headlined, "Callahan and Sons Real Estate Accused of Money Laundering and Fraud." The piece cited documents from an anonymous source, detailing the fake charity, illegal transactions, and ties to state officials. The company's stock plummeted that same day. Police raided my father's and Uncle Dan's offices, freezing their bank accounts. Both were summoned for hearings. My family was in chaos. Jake called, screaming at me. "What have you done, Eli? You've destroyed this family." Emily and Sarah sent furious texts, calling me a traitor. Dad didn't call, but Uncle Dan sent a message. "You'll regret this, Eli." Only my mother stood by me. One evening, she showed up at my apartment, her eyes red. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said, her voice trembling. "But you're going to suffer for it." I didn't defend myself or explain. I only said, "I just did what Grandpa believed I could do." Mom nodded, hugged me, and left. I knew she was caught in the middle between me and Dad, between love and loyalty. The family turned their backs on me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins cut off contact. I became the enemy in their eyes, the one who dismantled the Callahan empire. But I didn't regret it. Every time I looked at Grandpa's photo, I felt him beside me, smiling. The weeks following the article's publication engulfed Harrisburg in a media storm. Television, newspapers, and social media buzzed incessantly about the Callahan and Sons scandal. Images of my father and Uncle Dan appeared everywhere, on evening news and investigative reports, and even in the angry status updates of local residents. Their company collapsed swiftly, with accounts frozen and major contracts canceled. I heard they had hired the best lawyers, but the evidence from Grandpa's hard drive was too clear, too detailed. They couldn't deny it. I didn't follow the news much. Every headline, every article felt like a knife, reminding me that I was the one who set this in motion, not because I wanted to destroy my family, but because I wanted to do what Grandpa believed I could. Yet, that didn't ease the pain in my heart. I was lonelier than ever. Grandma, though she still loved me, seemed too exhausted to face what was happening. "You did the right thing, Eli," she said over the phone, her voice frail. "But let me have some peace for a while." I understood. She had lost Grandpa, and now her family was unraveling. I didn't blame her. One morning, as I sat in my apartment, staring at that 1978 Berlin photo of Grandpa, my phone rang. It was Harold Steinberg, Grandpa's lawyer. "Eli, you need to come to my office now," he said, his voice serious but tinged with excitement. "There's a part of the will I haven't disclosed. It concerns you." I was stunned. Another part of the will? I thought everything had been revealed at the previous reading, the $10 and old property number 1417, which turned out to be the abandoned house. But Steinberg's tone made me feel this was no small matter. I drove to his office, a mix of curiosity and anxiety swirling within me. When I walked in, Steinberg was seated behind his desk, a thick stack of documents in front of him. He smiled, a rare sight for someone as stern as he was. "Eli," he began, "your grandfather, Walter Callahan, was an extraordinary man, and he left you something far greater than what your family knows." I sat down, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I found the cellar, the documents, everything." Steinberg slid the stack of documents toward me. "This is your grandfather's hidden estate. During his time with the CIA, he amassed a significant fortune, not from illegal activities, but from savvy investments, overseas properties, and shares in a Silicon Valley tech company. The estimated total value, Hundreds of millions of dollars. I was speechless, unable to process it. Hundreds of millions of dollars? Grandpa, the man in a threadbare sweater living in an old wooden house, was that wealthy? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. But why didn't he tell anyone? Why did he live like that? Steinberg gave a sad smile. Your grandfather didn't care about money, Eli. He chose to live simply, because that's who he was. But he wanted this fortune to be used for good. And he left it all to you. With one condition. What condition? I asked, my voice trembling. Steinberg opened a page in the documents and read aloud. The entire estate is to be transferred to Elliot James Callahan on the condition that he uses a portion to establish an educational fund for underprivileged children. A dream Walter Callahan never had the chance to fulfill. The remainder is for Elliot to use freely, but in accordance with the conscience and values his grandfather believed in. Tears welled up in my eyes. Grandpa hadn't just left money. He'd left a mission, a true legacy, not just for me, but for people he'd never met. I remembered the afternoons when he spoke about the importance of education, how he wanted every child to have a chance to learn. It wasn't just talk. It was his lifelong plan. I wiped my tears and looked at Steinberg. I understand, sir, I said, my voice choked. I'll do what Grandpa wanted. Steinberg nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're a good man, Eli. Your grandfather knew that. And I believe you'll use this fortune wisely. I left the office, my mind reeling with numbers and new responsibilities. But more than that, I felt a deeper connection to Grandpa. He wasn't just a spy, a silent hero. He was a man with a vision, someone who wanted to leave the world better than he found it. And he had trusted me to carry on that dream. In the months that followed, I began fulfilling Grandpa's wishes. I established the Walter Callahan Education Fund for underprivileged children in Harrisburg and surrounding areas. I hired a team of experts to manage the fund, ensuring every dollar went toward building schools, providing scholarships, and supporting kids who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. But I wanted to do more. I wanted the world to know about Grandpa, not just as Walter Callahan, the simple man in the wooden house, but as Falcon, the silent hero of the Cold War. I used part of the estate to purchase a small building in downtown Harrisburg, transforming it into an exhibit called The Secret History of a Great Citizen. I displayed declassified documents from the cellar, photos of Grandpa in Berlin, and a replica of his notebook. I didn't reveal sensitive details, but it was enough to show people how extraordinary his life had been. The exhibit was free to the public, and every day I saw students, scholars, and locals visit, reading about Grandpa, marveling at his story. A year later, I took Grandma for a walk in the park near the exhibit. She had aged noticeably, but her eyes lit up when she saw Grandpa's name on the large sign. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Eli, she said, squeezing my hand. I smiled, feeling as though Grandpa was with us, watching from somewhere. My family never forgave me. Jake, Emily, Sarah, and other relatives never reached out again. Dad and Uncle Dan faced hearings, and though they hadn't been convicted yet, Callahan and Sons had completely collapsed. Mom stayed in touch, but she rarely spoke about Dad. I knew she was hurting, but she respected my choice. Standing in front of the exhibit one autumn afternoon, I reflected on my journey. I had lost my family, but I had found a greater purpose. Grandpa taught me that the truth, however painful, is worth fighting for. His legacy wasn't just money or secrets. It was trust, integrity, and hope for a better world. I left this message not just for those visiting the exhibit, but for myself. Live true to your conscience, even if the world turns its back on you. The truth may be buried, but it will always find a way to rise. That was the greatest lesson Grandpa left me, and I will live by it every day. What do you think? Was I right to expose my family, even if it meant destroying everything? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.